welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. This is Jenn, and I would like to introduce you to this week's guest. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book in your own words?
My name is Jayne Cowie. My book is called Curfew, and this is a novel about a near future Britain in which all men are electronically tagged and not allowed out after 7 o'clock.
It's such an interesting idea, and I think the story goes so many different interesting places. But I have a silly little question to start with. As I was researching your book, I noticed that it has a different name in the UK, After Dark, right?
Yes, it does. That's right.
And
You're going to ask me why we've got different titles.
Yeah, I was curious about like what goes into, a decision to change the name for a different market.
Yeah. Well, Curfew was my original working title. Unfortunately, here in the UK, another author put out a book coming out in the same month that was also called The Curfew. And so it was literally a publishing decision. I got an email in my inbox one morning saying there's another novelist putting out a book on the same day with the same title, and we're going to have a title change. And so there was a mad scramble to change it. And After Dark was dreamt up by the marketing team for my UK publisher. So yeah, I would like it to be a more exciting story than that, but it really is just a case of really bad luck. Or maybe it's just a really great title,
Yeah, that's very interesting. What are the chances of two books coming out at the same exact time?
Well, yeah, on the same day with the same title. You couldn't make it up, could you?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know what? They're both very good titles. They're both very intriguing, and I think they both speak to what goes on in the novel in really interesting ways. Mm-hmm. So I was curious about wondering if you could talk a little bit about your writing history, other things you may have worked on, or if this is your first novel. I'm just wondering, how this fits into your writing career as a whole.
Okay, so I've been writing for a long time now, probably about 13 years. I've written a lot of different things. I've written a lot of novels which were dreadful and didn't get published, and we're all quite happy about that. It took me a really long time, I think, to learn the craft and to learn how to write a novel properly, to reach kind of a publishable standard. And then I wrote some science fiction novels, which were published in the UK, but which did not do particularly well in terms of sales. I had a great time writing them, and that was really fantastic. But when I had finished those, I kind of took a step back and decided I needed to do something different, that pushing my career in that direction as a writer wasn't working. So I was going to try something different. And I had this idea for this book, what if we could just shut all the men indoors at night? What would that be like? And I pitched this idea to my agent. And I remember we had this conversation and her eyes sort of went really big. And she went, that book, yeah, that's the book, write that book. So that was back in 2019. So I wrote the book, she read it, she gave me some comments, I rewrote it, and it went out on submission. And obviously it then sold very quickly from that first submission. Kind of a debut, but not quite, I would describe myself as. But yeah, a long time. I didn't come to this book as my first novel. So anybody who's listening who is an aspiring writer, this is over a decade's worth of work to get to this point, and many, many unpublished books, many, many failures, and a lot of perseverance.
That's really useful to hear for a lot of people, I think. There is this misunderstanding that for a lot of people, this sort of thing happens overnight, and that can happen, and that's wonderful, but that's not usually the case. And
no, that did not happen to me.
Nor to me. I've published a couple comics, and it's a lot of a lot of just working in obscurity and getting really
Yeah.
good at your craft until something happens for you.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of failures and a lot of writing things that don't work, and then having to figure out, actually, why didn't this work? What do I need to do differently? What skills do I not have yet? And working on those things. But yeah, you don't arrive fully formed, I don't think. And the ability to write a novel and to write a novel really well isn't some magic power. You have to learn how to do it. And that takes a long time.
Absolutely. You know, and I think that it speaks to the importance of the ability to finish something and not let yourself get stopped up by perfectionism or worries about how it's going to turn out. Like you need to finish some things, even if they're not your best, just to teach you how to finish things and how to do it better the next time.
Yeah, and every new project you take on, you will be better than the one you did before, because you've got all the things you learn from the one before that you carry forward to the next project. So it's okay to write things that fail, even though it feels frustrating and awful at the time. I think it's a really important part of the journey, is to be able to write things that fail and to be able to accept that you are going to write things that fail. And that may be something that even continues after you are published. You know, it doesn't stop the day you get published, right, I'm there now and I know what I'm doing. That's absolutely not the case. It's always a journey, and you're learning all the time.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to another misunderstanding that at least I had as a child, was that every published writer is a full-time writer living on their writing, and that's how that works, you know, and that's not the case either. Like when I grew up into my teens and 20s, I remember being so surprised at how many writers had other jobs and did their writing on the sides of other commitments. And I didn't really quite internalize that until I was doing it myself, you know, working a desk job and writing other stuff on the side. Yeah, it's just really important to kind of just do it regardless of your circumstances and just get it done.
Yeah, I agree.
So something that I'm very interested in is what it takes to to imagine a kind of alternate history that is involved in crafting a society like the one that we see in Curfew, because it takes place in a world or in a UK where you know, things went differently than they have in our actual history, but also the things that happened that led to the institution of curfew aren't things that don't happen. You know, like there have been cases in the UK as well as outside the UK of women getting murdered in vulnerable spots. And, you know, so I'm wondering, what does it take to kind of imagine different paths for how societies go?
Well, I really started, as I said, with this what if all men were electronically tagged and not allowed out after 7 o'clock. That came from, obviously, as I'm sure will be clear to most people, being a woman living in a society which pretends to punish bad male behavior, but actually really in practice does not. So we have various laws in place to deal with bad male behavior, but they don't work. We don't actually apply them. I think I saw a statistic the other day that said something like the current rate of convictions for rape in the UK at the moment is something like 1.5%. I mean, what you're effectively saying is, if you do this, men, you are most likely going to get away with it, because actually the bar is set so high for a conviction that this is rapes that are actually reported to the police. Only 1.5% result in a conviction. So most men get away with it.
Wow.
What it would be like if something happened which actually pushed us to stop talking about things that happen to women and to start talking about men and about male behavior. What would we do? How could we control this? And so I have this idea, because obviously one thing that gets talked about an awful lot is female safety in public spaces. You know, we all know the stories, you know, you hear, I walk across the car park with my keys in my hand. I don't take the late bus. I don't take the late train. I always have somebody pick me up. I'm nervous when I get in a taxi. How would we manage that situation? And all violence really at its heart is about access. So you take the access away. If you want to make women safe, at night, just take the men out of the equation. And we take them out of the equation by locking them up indoors. So that was the initial idea. And then from that, it begins to develop, well, actually, how would that work in practice? How would we enforce it? Because we're going to have to enforce it, because plenty of men are just going to say, I'm not doing that. And they're going to go out anyway. So we're going to need some method to enforce it. Well, we've actually already got one. These electronic tags already exist. And some countries already use them in certain circumstances for certain people. We have people in the UK who have ankle tags, people who are on release from prison, those sorts of situations, so they can be monitored. So you roll that out, you make it widespread, you start tagging all the men, you go into secondary schools and you tag teenage boys, you know, you stop men in the street and you say, have you got a tag on, sir? And they say yes or no. And if they say no, you say, well, come with me and have one fitted. And then I felt that once we have those sorts of limits in place, other things would then follow, because once you've made one jump forward, every other restriction seems more acceptable because you do things a bit at a time. So then we start talking about cohab certificates, that you need counselling before you can move a man into your house and have a cohabiting intimate relationship with him. And it would also benefit women economically. And that was something I felt would be really important. Everybody knows about the gender pay gap, but as soon as men are removed from the workplace or restricted, those jobs are going to go to women, and women are going to start progressing economically. And that means political power, that means financial power, and that really starts to shift things then, because one of the problems women have at the moment, obviously, is we have this economic gap where, although we have equal pay, so for any given job, a man or a woman have to be legally paid the same. Overall, if you look at us collectively, men control more of the money than women do. And if you control more of the money, you earn more of the money, you can borrow more money. So they have more access to that pool as well, because you're more likely to get a mortgage, you're more likely to get a car loan. The majority of funding for startups goes to men, the overwhelming majority. It's very, very difficult for women to get money for startups. So we are then restricted. And if we need money, where do we go? Well, who do we ask? Well, we have to ask the men, because they've got all the money. So as soon as you start restricting men, you give women economic power, and that becomes then hugely important. And then women can start building a society that works for them, rather than a society that is designed to work for men, which is what we have at the moment.
Yeah, that was all so interesting to me, and it occurred to me while I was reading that what the legal curfew in this book does sort of institutes legally what was happening to women by mere custom, because women were restricted from leaving the house at certain times of day without a guardian or an escort. Women were cut out of these jobs that now they have access to in the world of the curfew. And so it really was very interesting to me, the ways in which the society for men in your book resembled what was happening to women already, the sort of turning of the tables.
Yes, I think one of the things that makes it more plausible is that there's really nothing in the book which hasn't already happened somewhere in some way, shape or form. And we've had, I don't know specifics of your laws over there, but certainly in the UK, we have had all sorts of different legal restrictions put in place to keep women out of the workplace, to keep us on lower wages, to keep us at home with children, to make sure that we have children, that we have as many as possible. So really all we're doing is saying, hang on a minute, how about if we actually just restrict the men just a bit? And I don't even think it's a massive restriction compared to some of the things that have been done to women historically in terms of restriction. I mean, here in the UK, it used to be perfectly legal to sack a woman from her job if she got married. And this is in well-known British companies like Marks and Spencer. You would go into your office on the Friday morning and saying, I'm getting married this afternoon, sir, to your boss. And he would say, oh, well, I won't be seeing you on Monday then, will I? And that would be it. You were gone, because the expectation was, of course, that there would be babies very shortly thereafter. And then you definitely wouldn't be working because you'd have other things to do.
And yeah, that absolutely still happens. I have a friend who, very conveniently lost her job after she came back from maternity leave, and so women
Yeah,
women's biology is used as an excuse in order to restrict them and to keep them away from opportunities. And that's what we see happening in this book too, like inherent traits that are sort of like accorded to men are and their biology and their physicality and their strength are the reasons why they're being kept up locked up at home. um
yeah,
there's so many interesting things going on. So one thing that I really loved was how the we have these different point of view characters, and they all give us different glimpses at ways in which women relate to the system, the way that they feel about the system, and the opportunities that it has afforded them as individuals. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you arrived at these various women's relationship to the system.
I knew that it was really important to me to have women of different ages, because obviously at different ages for women, life is very, very different. We have very different life stages. So that was really important to me. So obviously I have a 17-year-old girl, so on the cusp of adulthood, about to leave school, thinks she's very grown up, but as all 17-year-olds are, is still very naive and really doesn't understand the adult world at all. I have a woman in her early 30s who has got baby fever, who is desperate for a baby. And that sort of, again, we're talking about biology again, but again, that's really driving all her decisions and everything that she does, because that's her main focus. And then I have a woman in her early 40s who is the mother of the teenage girl, newly divorced, child obviously about to leave home, who is sort of about to explode into middle age and explore life under curfew as a free, single, financially independent woman. So she again is in a very different position. And I really wanted to explore their opinions of curfew, how they would feel about it, how they would benefit from it, but also how it would make their lives difficult, and how they would feel about those difficulties. And so I really wanted to have every woman characters, as it were. So none of these women are extraordinary. All of them are very ordinary. They've got ordinary jobs and they're living very ordinary lives, but in this extraordinary environment.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting the way in which generational differences affect how these women feel about the system, because you do have Sarah, the mother, who supports the system and is enamored by it a little bit because it has created such opportunities for her in her life to end a marriage that wasn't working for her and to find herself in a new career path. But then you do have her daughter, Cass, who absolutely hates the system because she sees it as having removed her access to her father. She sees it as responsible for the problems in her family. And I'm wondering too, if with Cass, there's just a little bit of teenage rebellion also behind that opinion of just like, well, my mom loves this, so this is something that I'm going to hate,
Oh, absolutely. I think that was a really important aspect of Cass's character, is that part of her dislike of curfew is because her mother is so pro curfew. Therefore, Cass is very much rebelling against the system, but she's doing so from a position of basically having spent her entire life being protected by it. So she's had all the benefits of it. She's now in a situation where she's about to enter the world as a young woman into a world that really loves young women, that has great opportunities for them, that is going to push her forward. Education, career, motherhood, all these things are going to be open to her, and they're not going to limit her in a way that they would have done before. But of course, because she doesn't know any different, she's unable to fully process all the advantages that she has. And she's also of an age where her moral compass is very rigidly fixed, and she sees things as very black and white. Everything's black and white, it's right and wrong, and she's unable to sort of process that there are gray areas here because she's immature, because she's 17.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you say that, it occurs to me that the difference between Sarah and Cass, in a way, speaks to how different generations of women have related to the feminist movement in general, because you have the older generations who had to work for those advancements and who remembered the world before those advancements and developments. And then you have the younger generations who don't remember a world before these things had been, really hard won, and who then, because they haven't experienced the struggle, don't really see feminism as a quite a vital force as perhaps their forebears do,
Yeah, I think we definitely do see generational differences. And I think one problem we also have is because we don't teach in schools, and we don't teach children kind of a history of feminism and a history of women's rights, that very many young people, and young women in particular, have no idea of feminist history, or of the restrictions that women were placed under, or of how women's lives have changed. So for example, I find if I tell women younger than me, did you know that actually the contraceptive pill was first introduced in the early 1960s, but here in the UK you could only have it if you were married and if you already had several children.
Wow.
So it was actually, it seems bizarre, doesn't it? Because this is also a time when huge amounts of shame was heaped onto young women who got pregnant outside of marriage. And we had here in the UK mother and baby homes, where if you were 18, 19, early 20s, you got yourself pregnant, you were shipped off to a mother and baby home. You lived there until you gave birth, and then the babies were taken, usually about 6 weeks old, and adopted. And these young women were then sent back home, and you behaved as if nothing had happened. The peak for this, 1968, 16,000 babies were removed from their mothers in mother and baby homes, and adopted. And many of these adoptions were coerced. These young women did not necessarily give their babies up willingly. This was an industry. So we won't give the pill to these young women, but we'll give it to a woman who's 38, who's got 5 kids, who may actually only have wanted 2 kids. And when you say that to young women, they're really shocked, because they're so used to this idea of the contraceptive pill. You just go ask your doctor for it. It's free here in the UK. It doesn't cost anything. And you just go and ask it for it, and they will give it to you, no questions asked. And they have no idea about that particular snippet of women's history here, and how easily these things can be taken away from us. We take them for granted, but actually they can be taken away very easily. And it's not that long ago that it was considered perfectly reasonable to withhold them from us. And that's why we have to, be aware of that, and to make sure that we fight to maintain and keep these things. Absolutely, always. So, and yeah, I think that generational gap is there. It is huge. It's a huge problem. And I don't think you realize the extent of it really either until you get older, and then you look back at yourself and you think, I can't believe I thought that when I was 20, how ridiculous I was. But it's ignorance and naivety, I think. And what we need is more education around these issues, around what happened and how we got to where we are.
Absolutely. And that is, over here is currently under attack from all sides. That there are all these movements to limit what topics we educate children about, and what books they're allowed to read, and, so on and so forth. Something that I found really interesting about the system, and I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about the cohab certificates too, because I'm very interested in that system. What interests me is that even though, all these protections are in place, that doesn't fully prevent men from exploiting women, or dysfunctional relationships, or, problems within a couple unit, or family problems, as we see with Sarah and Cass and the ex-husband. And I'm wondering as well, like, it seems that there are ways in which women can exploit the system too, in some interesting ways, or at least use it in order to advance their own interests or desires,
Yeah.
And I think, I guess what I'm getting to is, how did you think of the ways not really phrasing this very well, I apologize. But how did you come up with the ways in which people related to these restrictions and either worked within them or transgressed them, if that makes any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. I think if you look back historically at any controversial law, at any restriction, I mean, we've seen this with the COVID restrictions of the last couple of years that nobody could possibly have imagined. People react to these things in very different ways. Some people outright refuse to comply. Some people comply with absolutely everything. And most people fall somewhere in the middle where we kind of fudge it a bit. So we do our best, but there are grey areas where bits of it don't quite work for us, or where we do things to make the system work better for us. And I felt in this world of curfew, because the restrictions on men are quite tough. The punishment for breaking curfew is very tough. People are going to find a way to work with the people around them, or to use the people around them to make curfew work for them, to get the best out of it that they can, which I think is human nature, to be honest. We take the restrictions of the situation that we're in and we do the best we can to make it work for us. So, for example, Sarah's relationship with her ex-husband, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but Sarah does obviously use curfew in order to get him out of her life. But we learn as we read through the novel that he also used curfew to get himself quite a nice, comfortable life, almost, I suppose, a reversal of the idea of the kept woman, because he's been a kept man for most of his adult life. So he's had his bills paid, he's had huge amounts of free time, and curfew has been his excuse for living that way. What can he do? It's curfew. He's restricted. It's very difficult. So yeah, people, that's human nature. It's what we do. We make it work for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it because we are nothing as humans if not adaptable, and we can sort of adapt ourselves to any system that we might find ourselves under. But I think it also speaks to sort of the nature of these systems and institutions themselves, and how, maybe even like bureaucracy works, is that they are systems, but they also are comprised of individuals, and individuals aren't perfect, and they have blind spots, and they aren't always super invested in their jobs, and so like, it's interesting to me how curfew is this sort of like, not new, but still newish. It's been around for a little while, but it's not like an ancient institution. So it is this sort of like new force in society, but also it's just like a workaday thing that people have to sort of live their daily lives around and relate to in this very banal, like quotidian way of like, oh, I have to go to my job where I check tags, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something I'd like to speak about a little bit is the way that technology functions in the world of curfew, because there is a lot of like interesting technology that mirrors stuff that we have, but that is, slightly tweaked or slightly more advanced than the things that are available to us, like the ankle tags themselves, and the slates that all of our characters carry around, these like communication devices that also are web portals. They function a lot like our cell phones, but they seem to be like a little bit bigger and more omnipresent. And all these technological advancements are about surveillance, and I'm wondering about like the role of surveillance in this society and how that affects the way people live.
Yeah, surveillance is a big issue for us at the moment. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the United Kingdom at one point did have a reputation for having the highest number of CCTV cameras per head. So per person, we have more cameras than pretty much everybody else. So in the UK here, we are being watched constantly. And this is something we've kind of known in the back of our minds for a while, but people have pretty much accepted it, I think, and got used to it. And we know that every time you go online, you are effectively being watched. Google knows more about you than you know about yourself. I would think, I was actually reading something, we talk about surveillance. I was reading something the other day in which it said that Target, the supermarket you have over there, at one point figured out a way to tell if a woman was pregnant from changes in her shopping habits without the woman actually having to click a box on the website anywhere to say, yes, I'm pregnant. She didn't have to sign up to a baby club, nothing. And they had a computer programmer come in. Can you build us an algorithm that will do this? He said, absolutely. And he did. He created them an algorithm that could tell if you were pregnant. And this then allowed Target to start sending coupons for baby products to female customers who were pregnant, but who had not told Target that they were pregnant. And just to expand this a bit more, where it really gets crazy is that women started to complain. They said, why are you sending me coupons for baby food and, nappies and baby toys? I haven't told you I'm pregnant. So what Target did was, when they started sending out their coupons, they would bury their baby coupons in amongst coupons for things that the woman would never buy, like alcohol and lawnmowers and, men's body spray, so that these coupons for baby products would appear to be completely random, but they were not. The other coupons were just put in there to make it look like the baby coupons were random. So we really are being surveilled and watched all the time. So yeah, I think, we are already there in many ways. It's just we put the phone in our pocket voluntarily. We don't actually sort of wear it attached to our person in a way that we can't remove it. We've had cases here where men have been sent to prison and linked to violent crimes and sent to prison on the basis of their phone tracking, on the basis of their phone records. There was a young woman a couple of years ago, and this was around the time I started writing Curfew, and the man, she was living in London and she'd disappeared, and the police had tracked her movements to the last place she was seen. She'd gone to the flat of this particular man in London, and then she disappeared. And they had enough evidence to pin her murder on him. And he was actually in prison when her body was found about a mile from my house, almost a year later. And they did it because his phone showed that he had made this unusual journey out of London, up the motorway to the town where I live, and gone back again. So they knew, they couldn't find her, but they knew she was here. And it was that surveillance that allowed them to track him. And her image was on posters in our town centre for about 6 months saying, has anybody seen her? Do you have any information? Absolutely heartbreaking, just awful. But that was one of the things that led me a bit to Curfew, was, this idea that actually we can track men and we can see what they're doing. And if we became more transparent about this and did it in a more obvious way, what sort of difference would that make? And as I've already said, these tags already exist. We already have them. We just don't use them quite as widely as they are used in Curfew, because obviously that would be very expensive and very restrictive, and I don't think people are quite ready for it just yet. But maybe.
That is all so, both interesting and horrifying. Because it did occur to me while you were speaking that the ankle tags and the slates do kind of end up doing the same thing, except one is enforced on you and one is something that you voluntarily carry around with you all day. And both are kind of geared toward protecting women, right? Because men's movements are being restricted in order to protect women. And the technology of the slate is most often used in this book to solve disappearances or to figure out what happened to women or where they are so that they can be taken out of dangerous situations.
It would be a bit of a reversal, because one of the things we've seen, obviously, with the internet and the rise in social media is the huge amount of misogyny that is heaped onto women via online platforms, because it can be done anonymously. And I think for a long time, women have been able to live kind of in ignorant bliss, as it were, and social media and the internet has taken some of that ignorance away from us, because you only have to log on and it's there, the sorts of comments that are made, the pictures that women get sent unsolicited, pictures of women that are shared without women's permission. So in the world of Curfew, that's very much been reversed, and women are able to use online spaces beneficially and safely, rather than it being that way around, because we restrict how men use these things.
Wow. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'd like to thank you so much for coming to speak with us. This has been Jenn with Turn the Page podcast, in discussion with
Jayne Cowie, author of Curfew.
Thank you so much, Jayne. And it is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.